Everyone has that one game. Maybe it's a group of games. Games that hold a special place within your memory and your heart. Games that created a fundamental shift in your life as a gamer. Games whose importance is so strong that to imagine your life without it would be impossible. These are games that, sure, they have faults. They aren't perfect masterpieces. They aren't grand, spotless works of art. They have grit. They're old. They might even be buggy. But in our eyes, they might as well be perfect. Like I said, everyone has at least one game like this, maybe even a few. For me, one game series that stands out among many is Halo, specifically Halo Combat Evolved. It's hard to believe that this year will mark the 18th birthday of the Halo series, a franchise that started in the most unlikeliest of places, from an RTS game derivative of Bungie's previous work, Myth, to a sandbox third-person shooter built ground up for the Mac, to the Xbox staple that it is today. From there, this simple console FPS launched a large system-spanning series, literally bringing the original Xbox out of obscurity and landing Microsoft a significant piece of the video game pie. It transitioned to the 360 and even the One, with countless spin-offs, novels, animated and live-action shorts, and a loving community all along the way. Yet, in recent years, this once thriving ecosystem has started to rot. Relations between Halo fans and the developers and publishers have soured. What used to appear as a loving and genuine connection between gamers and Bungie has faded away, revealing the cynical corporate underbelly of Microsoft, devs losing focus on their core audience, instead hoping to cash in an even bigger paycheck, rather than focus on making their game fun for those who, actually still play it. By sheer coincidence, the time that I started to make this video, a little rumor started to circulate around the internet. The idea that the Master Chief Collection would be coming to PC. When I mean coincidence, I mean it. I was literally in the process of recording when this news went down, and I even held off for a week just to make sure that I had all the facts before going forward. And I hate to be a hipster, but I was pretty certain the rumor was true. And it made sense. Microsoft was desperate to get its old Halo fans back. A lot of the old Halo fans had moved on to PC, and Microsoft desperately needed that pool of gamers back in their hand. And sure enough, Master Chief Collection was announced for Steam. So if Halo Infinite isn't the game to revive the series, then at least we'll be able to play our old classics. My relation to Halo might as well be my relation to video games. Halo Combat Evolved was one of, if not the first FPS I ever played. Of course, it was years after the fact, but to retell a story that I've told before, my old man handed me down his original Xbox. Among his small library of older Xbox titles, Halo stood out to me. I remember hearing about it like it was almost taboo. It was too violent, too scary, at least for a kid my age. So, as one might guess, this only made the game all the more alluring. Eventually, I got to play it, and it changed my world forever. I had never played a video game quite like it. The only other similar game that I had played at the time was Metroid Prime Hunters for the DS. Halo is a huge fucking step up from that, and man did it get me hooked. Just imagine someone whose only experience with video games is the Nintendo DS. Cartoonish graphics, chill, relaxed gameplay, simplistic, childish plots. Then show them Halo, a game set within the first-person perspective. Tough, battle-hardened Marines, gritty military weapons, spaceships, advanced jeeps, tanks, aliens, hovercrafts, plasma guns, and of course, that huge friggin' Halo ring. Just about everything in Halo is awe-inspiring, especially to a casual or younger gamer. From the environment to the visuals, the combat to the vehicles, the story to the atmosphere, it is all wonderfully executed. Even the plot, something that most FPS games took for granted around that time, it's surprisingly well done. It's not perfect, of course, but it's very engaging, and it helps immerse the player in this mysterious alien environment. So let's dive into what makes Halo an awesome classic. Halo starts off by throwing the player right into the middle of the story, aboard a massive human starship floating through a solar system not our own, with an ominous yet beautifully simplistic artificial structure in the distance. We get introduced to Keyes, Cortana, even a fan favorite Johnson, although in this game he was simply referred to as Sniper Sergeant. Yeah, not the legacy character we remember him as now. We hear mentions of a war, a mysterious alien force called the Covenant. They have superior technology and, from the sounds of it, we aren't faring too well against them. With these guys closing in, the entire ship readies for combat, including the Master Chief. Intentionally a blank slate, he's meant to be a suit of armor that any player can project themselves into. And it works. Well, yes, he is a character in the grand scheme of things. He doesn't feel separated from the player, at least not in Combat Evolved. The opening to Halo is up there as one of the best openings in a first-person shooter. It does so much stuff right that it really makes you forget its age. The game doesn't just drop you into combat like an arena. Instead, it opens quietly. The opening level forces you along one path, at first without your weapons. To some people, this opening is a little too slow, but you gotta keep in mind what Bungie had to accomplish in this short time span. Even though there is a legitimate tutorial within Halo CE, the actual tutorial with button prompts, the actual tutorial, the one that the player doesn't actually notice, is the first level in its entirety. During this opening, you get a glimpse of your foes, and man, is this a sight. I'll admit, seeing the Covenant in their blocky, low polygon glory made me a little excited. You get introduced to the story and the duo of the series meet, Chief and Cortana. Jen Taylor and Steve Downes do a great job riffing off of each other. It's a little clunky in this first game, but when you consider the development hell that Halo went through, you really appreciate how smoothly everything turned out in the end. But this whole first mission serves as a good introduction to combat. Once the player is acclimated to his controls and how to move around, you are then given a weapon. From there, you get to learn the enemy variety and behavior, and you also learn the usefulness of certain weapon types. The first enemy you run into are grunts. They're basic cannon fodder who can go down in a single headshot, but in large numbers they can easily overwhelm the player. Then there are the elites, the main foes of the Covenant army. These guys go hand in hand with the player. Unlike grunts, who are pretty simplistic in terms of AI, these guys love to make tactical decisions on the fly. They run around, they utilize their cover, they'll flank the player. If you chuck a grenade at them, these guys will be sure to roll their way to safety. But most importantly, these guys have shields, just like the player. This means that a precision weapon with good aim can't immediately take them down. Instead, you need to bring down their shields before either aiming for the head or going in for a risky melee. The mission really just has a nice pace. Well-constructed firefights separated by corridors for the player to cool down and get their bearings. All the while, it serves as a nice cold open to this universe. The introduction ends kind of like Star Wars, with an escape pod crashing to this mysterious alien world. With the first level finished, the game now needs to teach the player another important aspect of Halo's level design, the pure immensity and scale of these levels. This is where we're introduced to the mission Halo. This mission is a very nice reveal to any unsuspecting player. The cramped metal corridors of the Pillar of Autumn are exchanged for these vast open landscapes on this strange alien structure. Instead of restrictive hallways, there are massive canyons, huge fields, rivers, cliffsides. It's all good stuff. From there, the game introduces you to the open level design, giving you a warthog to navigate across this massive landscape, all the while making sure the player has a good amount of freedom. The level of freedom in Halo Combat Evolved hasn't really been seen that much in the following games. The only issue for me is that the game has a bit of trouble transitioning between levels. A lot of times it can seem a bit contrived, mostly due to the fact that Bungie had started making these maps without any thought of how they tied in together. They had no idea how they were going to fit this into the overall story. Still, despite its problems, the story and atmosphere of this game are great. And to be honest, I did find myself actually engaged in the campaign again, despite knowing the entire story beat for beat. There's just something about it that really works. I still enjoy Halo's story. Its characters, its world, I still love everything about it. While the dialogue can feel a bit clunky, especially nowadays, it somehow manages to maintain an immersive plot thread, keeping the player hooked on what will happen next. Halo Combat Evolved just has so much going for it. The dynamic between Cortana and Chief, the relationship of Captain Keyes and the various Marines, the religious fiercity of the Covenant, and the mystery of Halo, not to mention the terror of the parasitic flood. The introduction of the flood is legendary, and it's something that I want to talk about later. Just the amazing reveal of this alien parasite, this almost Lovecraftian biological horror, and the ultimate twist of Halo's true purpose. Its simplicity really holds up. Even the climax of the game, the ending that would become a staple in later Halo games, it makes sure to end on a bang. A bit of a cliffhanger, sure, but one that really holds up on its own. The story has a definitive beginning and ending. People have been talking about how to adapt Halo into a movie or a TV show, and while I'm somewhat against that idea, I think Halo CE's main plot could have some potential. It's a simple plot that's straightforward but has a pretty good flow, although I'm not waiting on the edge of my seat for any kind of movie adaptation. So while we're talking about the single player, I want to get back on the levels. It's an odd aspect about Combat Evolved that seems to be scorned. For those of you who didn't know, Halo CE went through many development issues. Of course, the game had gone through many iterations at this point, so as you might imagine, Halo really wasn't this finely crafted masterpiece. This might come off as a surprise, but I love the levels in Combat Evolved. Aside from a couple outliers, the levels in Halo are fantastic, both to look at and to play. When it comes to gameplay design, I think Bungie really scored with their campaign. Halo has linear levels, but not linear like modern FPS games. They still allow for plenty of freedom with larger open environments. This combined with the combat sandbox really makes Halo still fun to play almost 18 years later. So then, let's talk about the combat in Halo Combat Evolved, because it's awesome. I feel like Halo kind of gets scoffed at as just being a generic blockbuster shooter, and its combat usually gets swept under the rug, ignored for the genius that it is. Of course, this is mostly due to the gradual downgrade of the series. With Halo 2 and 3's reliance on the BR, Halo Reach's love of precision and one-shot kill weapons, Halo 4's introduction of QuickTime events, and Halo 5's short, linear, bland level design. What eventually happened is that Halo shifted away from being a combat sandbox and more into a scripted, stop-and-pop shooter. I'm about to say something extremely controversial, but you guys have to bear with me for a second. Alright, you ready? I think Halo Combat Evolved has the best combat in the whole franchise. Alright, let me explain. The advantage Combat Evolved has over its sequels is how simple and straightforward it is. It has a smaller roster of weapons, a smaller roster of vehicles, no equipment, no armor abilities, less variety in movement, and even a smaller pool of enemies to fight. On paper, this sounds like Halo CE should have the worst combat loop out of all the Halo games, yet its campaign remains up there as one of the best single players in the entire series. Why is that? I'm someone who's religiously played every Halo game up until 5, and I mean it. I'm talking Halo 2, Halo 3, Halo 3 ODST, Halo Reach, yes, even Halo 4. I gotta say, there's so much to Halo Combat Evolved that the latter games just kinda lost along the way. And no amount of weapon variations, new vehicles, new addition to combat or movement, they just can't make up for the simple design decisions perfected almost 18 years ago. So first, let's talk about the most important aspect of a first-person shooter, the guns. Halo sports one of the most legendary weapon lineups in video game history. It's to the point that literally every one of Halo CE's original weapons would make a return in the subsequent games. There's the classic Aliens-inspired assault rifle, the Magnum, the plasma rifle, the plasma pistol, the shotgun, the sniper rifle, the rocket launcher. Hell, even weapons that weren't available in the campaign, like the fuel rod cannon, the flamethrower, even the energy sword, they all became available in the sequels. The reason why this lineup still makes an appearance in all subsequent Halo games is because of just how well they flow together. So much so that I think Halo's over-reliance on adding in new gimmick weapons kind of eroded that original design. Let me explain. Just about every gun in Halo CE fits a particular niche, while at the same time, each weapon feels surprisingly balanced. There are no weapons that are too OP, nor are there any weapons that feel useless or redundant. I'll start by getting the obvious gun out of the way, the Magnum. The Magnum is pretty cool in Combat Evolved. It's kind of sad to see how it remains a bit of a relic for an old era in gaming, in which every gun, yes even the pistol, had some use in combat. Nowadays, the pistol is often relegated as a second thought, only used in cases when you don't have your primary weapon. But in Halo, it remains a worthy adversary, even in the campaign. Its detractors all stem from the multiplayer. And you know what? Yeah, I can agree that it's a bit unbalanced when fighting with other players. In the campaign, however, the Magnum doesn't really have this issue. Unlike other player-controlled Spartans, it takes more than a few headshots to take an elite down. And its ineffectiveness against elite shields helps balance its otherwise amazing headshot potential. Sure, it can headshot grunts and jackals, even take down hunters fairly quickly, but its limited round capacity combined with the AI of the latter two enemies being designed to make critical hits difficult, this really helps make the Magnum from reaching OP territory. Unlike the BR or the DMR, the Magnum shouldn't be used as your only gun. You need to be a bit more clever. So this is where other weapons come in, and again, they fit together really well. Halo introduced the feature of restricting a player to only 2 weapons, a staple of modern gaming. Now, the player can pick up just about any 2 weapons in the game, but they could only pick up 2. This meant that while you often didn't have the most ideal tools to complete the job, you could still make do with what you had. You had to think on your feet and adapt to your situation. Sure, you could have a rocket launcher in one hand and a sniper rifle in the other, but with limited ammo, you'll run into a problem once you use it all up. The name of the game is to be adaptable. You need to be able to change your tactics in response to the ever-changing sandbox. I experienced a brief moment that I honestly regret not recording, which kind of inspired me to make this video in the first place. It was just a moment I had with combat that was so good I had to talk about it. Near the end of Assault on the Control Room, I was beginning to cross an overpass, shooting bad guys as they weaved in and out of cover between these rocks, when suddenly a wraith from down below started shooting at me. Once I took care of the enemies up top by outflanking them or by surprising them from their cover, I turned my sights towards that annoying tank. Luckily, I had a rocket launcher saved up from earlier, so I managed to take it out from a distance. Upon taking the elevator down, I was greeted by an easier situation than I initially expected. With the wraith gone, I had a nice open area to get prepared and to spend some time planning my attack. which involved me climbing these steps up to the control room. I found a hidden sniper rifle and a few more rockets, so I decided to climb this massive tower. With a nice elevated position, I started sniping pockets of enemies who hadn't even spotted me. I even took out the 2 hunters waiting for me down below. When I thought the coast was clear, I climbed back down and moved towards the control room. With no enemies to face, I got a little cocky. A bit too cocky. I traded my rockets for a plasma rifle, not expecting to face any more tanky enemies. By the time I had made it to the top, I thought the rest of the level was just going to be an easy cakewalk. Until I reached the top of the staircase. And there stood 2 hunters, who I had failed to even see from my vantage spot. With no close-range weapons that could even do any damage to them, I freaked out and immediately started to backpedal. I immediately used up my remaining grenades in hopes of killing at least one, but with my grenades depleted, I failed to stop their advance. After taking damage from one of their blasts, my health got pulled into the red. I knew that one more hit was all it took to kill me. I slowly retreated, continuously trying to shoot at the 2 hunters, eventually getting backed into a corner on the next level down. I had to quickly dodge their projectiles, all the while trying to come up with a plan on how to kill them, with the only viable weapon I could use being a sniper rifle. However, they kept themselves facing towards me, their huge shields blocking any of their weak spots, which meant that I didn't really have a shot on them. I had a tense standoff, where both hunters slowly encroached on my position, pushing my back further and further against the wall. As I tried to shoot at one, the other would just move forward. This meant that I had to come up with some drastic actions fast. I had to keep dodging their projectiles, but I needed to outflank them. I just needed to get a good shot. Eventually, one charged at me. I managed to take it down, then immediately turned my sights onto the next one. Somehow, I managed to get a shot off, finally killing it. That was awesome. In just a short gameplay section, not only did I have the freedom to meaningfully change the situation by taking care of enemies beforehand, but I also had the freedom to squander it as well. This single part of the level could play out in an entirely different way too, like if you ignore the Wraith at first, only to be forced to encounter it later on, or if you decide to go guns blazing up to the control room without taking care of any enemies first. This is what makes Halo such a fun game. It's not just an FPS, it's a combat sandbox. A combat sandbox refers to a type of game that doesn't really exist anymore. This type of game design was very prevalent in early FPS games. Doom, Duke Nukem, Quake, Half-Life, even Halo. This type of game design, however, did begin to fall out of style in favor of more realistic shooters. For me, Medal of Honor was kind of the big one. Call of Duty definitely put the nail in the coffin, with a bigger focus on generic soldier enemies becoming more common. But in Halo CE, all the enemies stand out, with a huge variation in behavior, attacks, health, and overall strategies needed to deal with them. Halo feels a bit like an old school FPS. The AI differs greatly among different enemies, but it all gels well once it's placed into the sandbox. Grunts are directly tied to elites. Sure, they're dangerous in numbers, especially when you have ones wielding needlers, but their braveness works off of their respective elites. Elites are tougher, with stronger shields and impressive AI that has them seeking out and hunting down the player. But you kill the leader, and the grunts will all start to panic. There's also a ton of variation amongst the elites, with various classes that behave differently. Most of them are standard elites who will have a squad of grunts accompanying them, but some have energy swords, others have active camo, and while they don't have shields, they can easily blend into the environment. Jackals are a bit more independent, and they serve as a way to draw your fire. They hold this energy shield that are more susceptible to energy weapons. Having a ballistic human weapon won't be that effective against them. They can also panic too, which allows you to easily melee them in the back. Hunters are awesome. They're like walking tanks. They have impenetrable armor. They're slow, they're huge, and they can kill the player in one shot. Luckily, their attacks are slow and dodgeable. From a distance, they'll shoot an explosive fuel rod at you, which is basically like a slow-moving arcing rocket. Up close, they'll swing their huge shields at you, which you can still dodge if you're fast enough. They're also always in pairs, which is meant to divide your attention. To kill them, you need to target at their exposed weak spots. There's an easy one to shoot on their back and a risky one at their front, which is harder to hit.
Explosives can take them down, but precision weapons, along with good aim, can really save you time and ammo. Even with vehicles, we see a nice variation. Ghosts are just fast-moving, annoying assholes, who are there just to attack you when you least expect it. Banshees are kind of the same, but they can also fly, but they're there mostly to keep you moving through the level, instead of camping down in one spot. Wraiths are literal tanks with a pretty long range and a devastating attack. They serve mostly as just a large obstacle for the player. Since we finished talking about the Covenant, we need to talk about the Flood. The Flood are the controversial inclusion to Halo, and while they haven't been done much justice in latter games, their role in Combat Evolved is much more justified. The entire point to the Flood is that they're this hive mind organism, and to give credit where it's due, Halo does a surprisingly good job at making them different from the other enemies. Flood spores are the basic cannon fodder. They're mostly there just to draw your fire. It's easy to kill a few of them, and a well-thrown grenade can take out a huge swarm. But if you get too cocky around big groups of them, or if your shields are down, they can kill you in no time. Flood carriers are definitely the creepiest enemy in this game. They're these explosive, suicidal enemies that are really slow, but they always charge towards the player. If you get too close, or if you shoot them, they'll fall down and explode, doing a ton of splash damage and releasing a ton of flood spores. These guys are pretty easy to handle so long as you don't let them sneak up on you. Also, there is this hilarious feature, and I'm still not sure whether or not it's just a bug or a legitimate mechanic, but these guys don't explode from grenades until they land, meaning that you can chuck a grenade towards them and it'll only send them flying. They don't explode until they hit the ground. It can make battles really chaotic. Lastly, we get to the standard warrior classes, which have some small variations. Warriors are made up of turned elites and marines, which only influences their size and profile. They have a great range of movement, being able to leap across huge spaces and even high platforms. They sport a pretty damaging melee if you get too close, but they can also utilize their weapons, but not that well. They tend to miss a lot, with sporadic and inaccurate gunfire. However, you definitely want to keep an eye out for those with rocket launchers and shotguns. These guys have a good habit of killing you when you least expect it. I think the Flood are a pretty good inclusion. Unlike other games that introduce a new enemy in the third act, the Flood are a nice and balanced inclusion. They behave very differently to the Covenant to make them stand out, all the while they're still pretty fun to fight. They also add to the overall creepy atmosphere that Halo excels at, and I think they were done really well. The only enemy I think is outright annoying are the Sentinels. That's all they are, annoying. They don't really have any interesting behavior, and they just tend to interrupt the flow of combat. I feel like they really could have been done better. Still, aside from that, I do like all the enemies in this game. It's clear that Bungie put a lot of effort in their combat and the combat loop, which makes the game still fun to play almost 18 years later. When I revisited this game, I didn't expect to fall in love with it again, yet here I am, making this video. It's hard to describe, but it just works. Enemies are smart enough to not feel like pushovers, which forces the player to also act smart. You need to think on your feet and to adapt to any situation that might fall out of your favor. You need to swap weapons, change strategies, change your position. The combat in Halo is just well designed, and I love it. I love jumping through large firefights, trying to take out more dangerous enemies among others, all the while dodging projectile fire. I love sneaking through corridors and canyons, unspotted by Covenant forces, figuring out which baddie to take out first. I love circle strafing around a pair of hunters, trying to distract them with grenades while trying to get around to their weak spot. I love creeping through desolate Forerunner structures, listening out for Flood as all of a sudden a huge swarm barges in towards me and my shotgun. The gameplay in Halo is near perfection, and despite the rushed level design, it makes Halo stand up to this day. But another factor that I didn't expect to help out was the enemy design. I'm talking visuals. When it comes to visuals and models, I love how all the enemies are visually distinct from one another. Sorry, but I just need to gush about this enemy design. The Covenant are just fantastically designed. Each one has a drastically different profile, and just by silhouettes you could easily discern any enemy from another. Grunts are short and stocky, Jackals are spry and skinny, Elites are tall and lean, Hunters are huge and bulky. Even the Flood get this treatment too, with Flood variants all having different sizes and shapes to represent their role. For all intents and purposes, Bungie could have just made the Flood almost exact carbon copies of Elites and humans. Maybe make their skin pale, add glowing red eyes, it could work lore-wise if you rewrote it. But no, they went out of their way to make sure the Flood forms were distinct from their hosts, with bent and unnaturally distorted limbs and body parts, giving these guys their own creepy profile. However, the one feature that has a big role in making these guys distinct is the color. The colors for each enemy are fantastic, and they serve as a huge role in letting the player identify a faction and what class of NPC within that faction in just a given glance. Grunts all have their own colors, with oranges identifying low cannon fodder, red marking grunt majors who are a little stronger. You can also find special operations grunts who are distinguished by their pale grayish armor. They tend to hold power weapons, which means that the player can recognize their danger just by their color. The same goes for the elites. Basic elites have bright blue armor with slightly stronger majors sporting bright red armor. Zealots have bright gold armor, and they either have really strong shields or they'll just charge the player with a dangerous energy sword. Likewise, Spec Ops elites have silver armor and sport strong shields. Bungie could have just made these classes the exact same color. I mean, this is what most modern games do. But no, they all stand out from one another with a bright variety in color palettes. This goes for all other enemies as well. Jackals sport grayish, hard to see armor, but they have these bright bluish green shields that, again, really make them stand out from the other Covenant. Hunters, meanwhile, have a darker shade of blue contrasted against this bright orange flesh. It's just a really striking color combination. Since we're talking about the visuals, I feel like I need to bring up the graphics. Since I'm playing Halo Refined, which brings the PC version of the game up to par with the console version, this game looks awesome. It's hard to pinpoint why, but despite the limitations of the hardware, Halo just nailed a ton of graphical touches that makes this game all the more beautiful. Sure, models aren't that detailed and textures can look a bit grainy, but it really holds up well. Here's another controversial quote. Halo CE remains my favorite Halo game in terms of visuals, with maybe Halo 3 being a close second. A huge factor to this is, in my opinion, the art style. Halo just has a great art style that is fun to look at. Maps still have enough detail to make them feel like real places with props, foliage, even some nice lighting. Also the color. God, the color really makes each level feel different from the next. For example, Pillar of Autumn is filled with grimy metallic grays, whites, and beiges with flat industrial lighting. Then you land on the Halo level, which has bright sunny lighting with clear blue skies and a bright green landscape along massive stone cliffs and silver metallic structures. Then, in Truth and Reconciliation, the first part of the level has these dry, arid colors, brown and tan rock, all set during the night. Not to mention the beautiful skybox, where the massive gas giants hangs illuminated in the night sky, while you can see the rest of the Halo ring as well. Then once you get up into the ship, you get greeted to this alien cold purple and violet environment. Every level is like this too, even ones that repeat with differing tones and atmospheres, all through a variety in lighting and environments. There's one thing I hate more than Halo 5's art style. It's Halo Anniversary's art style. Purely from a technical standpoint, Halo Anniversary is impressive as it manages to have two engines running side by side, but literally everything else is wasted. Halo Anniversary is the definition of a lazy cash grab. Nothing new is brought to the table, with the odd art style of Halo Reach awkwardly smashed in with 343's messed up interpretation of Halo, and it doesn't work at all. Models and weapon visuals just don't fit within the environment, and they really look out of place. Now, I'm a fan of Halo Reach, but I don't remember the art style in that game looking cluttered. In fact, it looks pretty clean, with stuff looking nice and distinct against Reach's environment. But in Halo Anniversary, it almost seems like each asset, whether it be vehicles, models, textures, or environments, were just made independently from each other. It's kinda like the overrated mod SPV3. Yeah, I said it, it's a bloated mess without any unifying colors. It just looks ugly. As I said, enemies in the original game stood out amongst their environments. They were easy to see and were really distinct, not just from textures, but from each other as well. All the while they matched this general aesthetic. But not here. Instead, enemies and environments are filled to the brim with this unnecessary clutter, and it just starts to blend together. In a rush to make the game look better, the game now looks ugly. How does that happen? The worst offense, however, is how 343 completely misses the fucking point of certain levels. How on earth do you not understand what a level is trying to do? For example, Truth and Reconciliation. The level is supposed to be on this arid plateau in the middle of the night. You have this dark lighting combined with this sandy color palette, and it fits nicely, especially in contrast to the cool violets and purples in the latter part of the level. It's a nice change of pace from the bright and sunny grasslands of the previous level, Halo. But in Anniversary Edition, not only is the lighting brighter, but there's grass everywhere. What? It's supposed to be an arid desert, not a nice, pleasant prairie. How in the world do you make that kind of blunder?
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
The interior of the ship isn't that bad. Honestly, it's just been overly detailed to the point where, yeah, it does feel a bit more alien. Although, it's very redundant and pointless. Still, this entire level is just ruined by the lighting. Again, this is pervasive throughout the entire game. Everything is way too fucking bright. It's supposed to be nighttime, yet it's bright as day. The worst example of this, though. The worst fucking crime of 343 entirely missing the mark when it came to making the original levels can be seen with, ironically enough, 343 Guilty Spark. I had no idea how impactful this level would be, even for someone like me who knew the ending before I even played it. More pessimistic gamers tend to shrug off this level as pointless. I already know the spoiler, what's the point? The point isn't just the reveal, although it is important. The point is the oppressive atmosphere that the level presents. It beautifully builds up this awesome tension, using great examples of show don't tell, just to hint at what's ahead, but never quite explaining it. This level is a great example of less is more. I can easily imagine just some AAA studio doing this level. Instead of having a slow build-up, they would just have a loud jump scare where the flood immediately pop out of like a closet. Then the game immediately transitions to an action sequence. But here, Bungie decided to go really quiet and reserved, wanting to create an atmosphere for the player to eat up. So with that, I need to talk about what Anniversary did. More specifically, what it did wrong. Guilty Spark was given a similar facelift as they did to Truth and Reconciliation, with some of the same problems. Instead of matching the mood and atmosphere of the original game, 343, for some reason, decided that they just wanted to show off how much shit they could clutter on the screen. More foliage, more props, more grass, more lights, more fucking everything. The entire level became brighter, more colorful, and its original dark atmosphere was just thrown away. It doesn't look bad, but it loses focus. It fails to replicate the same tone as the original level. Again, it feels like it was made independently in a vacuum. The same goes for the interior as well. So far in the game, we, the player, have gone through plenty of Forerunner interiors. However, this one is supposed to make us know that something isn't quite right. Again, I think the simplicity of the original game makes this easier and more prominent. Well, in the remaster, they just didn't even bother. In the original game, the corridors are much darker and grimier, not to mention the fact that since there is less detail, color really pops. When you see massacred squads of Covenant, it really stands out with their colorful bodies and equipment, along with their brightly colored blood staining the walls. But again, in the new game, there's just too much detail, too much lights, too much everything. You lose that sense of uneasiness, the idea in the back of your head that something is terribly wrong. Instead, it was just soullessly made to make the game look more pretty. The issue with the Anniversary Edition is pervasive across the entire campaign, with the moody atmosphere achieved by the original game instead being replaced by a bland, prettier environment. Halo CE's art style is just so simple and clean. Just the fact that 343 managed to mess it up is really impressive. That's all I have to say about Anniversary. A soulless remake of a game that didn't need a remake, made by people who clearly didn't care for the original. So should you get the Anniversary Edition? No, of course not. Don't be an idiot. Before I wrap up the single player, there's one last aspect I need to talk about. The music. Halo's music is fucking legendary. So much so that I'm pretty sure most people who haven't even played the game at least recognize the main monk choir theme. Combat Evolve's music is awesome, with Marty O'Donnell providing some amazing tracks. He does a great blend of distinct melodies and themes throughout the campaign, combined with nice ambiance. Halo was one of the first games to utilize a dynamic audio system, which played cues and stingers at certain moments in certain levels. It's a little basic, but it works. The tracks are amazing too. Some tracks try to capture the chill but awe-inspiring spectacle of Halo itself. While others try to go for some more moody ambiance as you're deep underground. My love for Halo CE's soundtrack just ties in with Halo 3, although mostly due to the fact that Halo 3 reuses a lot of the same tracks from CE, but just updates them with better quality and more instruments. However, it does a good job at not overly changing the track, making the original track still retain its identity, and, you know, not making them less unique. But just the right amount of tinkering to bring them to life. My all-time favorite track in the Halo series is in both of these games, so I like both soundtracks. Still, I think Halo CE's soundtrack is probably the best in the series, if not for its originality. Halo's audio design was just really hit out of the park. As much as I love old FPS games, a lot of them tend to lack in the audio department, with really bad sound quality or poorly programmed music. A lot of times you get moments where you're running around an arena in complete silence. But not in Halo. Everything about this game is just smooth, and it fits together nicely. From the distinct sound effects of each weapon, to the audio, to even some of the voice acting. It still feels like a big budget release, despite its age. Halo's campaign really does hold up. I know it sounds a bit like nostalgia's taking over, but I'm serious, guys. I was not expecting this game to still be fun. It's weird to think about how chaotic this game's development was, with rushed mechanics and plenty of cut content, because playing it all the way through, Halo CE really feels like a nicely wrapped package. Its story, while basic, is simple and sweet. A nice action-adventure story that incorporates themes of exploration and a surprising amount of horror. Everything just hooked me. Its atmosphere, its gameplay, its world, even its characters. It's not the most tightly crafted single player, but goddamn if it isn't one of the most engaging. So before I wrap this up, there is one thing I want to talk about. Something whose legacy was cemented within this game. The multiplayer. talking about the multiplayer for any Halo game immediately raises the stakes on just about any discussion. Everyone has their favorite game, and everyone has their least favorite game, and they'll fight tooth and nail to prove it, more specifically by attacking every other game. For whatever reason, Halo 2 fans seem to be the ones who do this the most. Halo 2 was the best one in the series, hands down, it was so much better than Combat Evolved. But every game did have some problems. Halo 2 had exploits and button combos, which, in case you're wondering, that is one of the small vendettas I have against that game. Halo 3 had equipment and not enough competitive maps as Halo 2. Halo Reach had armor lock and even less hardcore competitive maps. Halo 4 had loadouts, kill streaks, and was entirely casual. Halo 5 was... ugh. For Combat Evolved, it's the Magnum, or Chiron TL34. One of those two. First things first, the multiplayer. It's still alive. At least on PC with the original copy. It gets pretty busy too. On weekends you'll see a dozen or so 16-player servers completely filled. That's a lot of people playing a 17-year-old game. However, there are plenty of annoyances that you'll face upon embarking this game's multiplayer. Most of the servers are run by Latin American players, and their lag shows. It can get pretty ridiculous too. The game stutters, there's rubber banding, vehicles behave like shit, damage sometimes doesn't register, animations sometimes don't even play. It's a huge mess. Just try to stick with servers with low ping, and that's all you can do. That being said, playing across many different servers and through weird custom games was some of the most fun I had in a long time. The tried and true Halo gameplay really holds up, even in multiplayer. Some game modes purely exist just to cause chaos, such as randomized weapon game modes that are not too dissimilar to Fiesta Slayer. There's rudimentary infection, some race game modes, all of it was just a lot of fun, and I had such a blast. I only wish more people were actually willing to boot up their old copies and play. I even got to play some larger scale maps, the ones created by Gearbox for the custom edition. Like most people, yeah, I agree, they're pretty bad. It's clear that they were only made to utilize the larger player counts that online multiplayer on the PC could provide, but a lot of them just ended up feeling a bit too closed in. They're mostly just large canyons with narrow choke points dividing each base, and all these maps overuse the figure 8 layout, in which there are two routes from each base to the other that both converge in the middle of the map. So what always happens is that one team manages to make it to the power weapons, or God forbid, a scorpion, and then they just camp the other team's spawn. Oftentimes, rounds go on forever, with literally no flag capture of any kind. It's just impossible on these restrictive maps. Still, I had fun playing on them, especially on Bungie's own maps, even the weird ones. I like how quaint and experimental Halo Combat Evolved was, especially compared to the latter games in the series. Like, one guy at Bungie thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we made a giant map that existed almost like a vertical 2D arcade game with multiple levels that players could traverse? To which someone else added, hey, that's a great idea, let's make 2 of them. It was back when Bungie didn't really give a shit about competitive play. Instead, the maps were made to be fun, and they really show it to this day. Of course, some maps are better than others, and some maps are just based around a weird mechanic. Still, there has never been a game mode, not even to this day, that can even compete to Team Slayer rockets on Chiron TL34, the fine wine of Combat Evolved. The multiplayer is plenty of fun, and while I wouldn't just recommend it on its own, I'd still say it's worth a try. So yeah, that was Halo Combat Evolved, and as much as I would like to say my conclusion and end the video, I can't simply ignore how I actually managed to get this game. I get the impression that a lot of new players are considering on just waiting for its release in the Master Chief Collection on Steam before they pick it up. However, as I mentioned before, the Master Chief Collection only has Halo Anniversary, which includes all those dumb additions that are just pointless, and that no new inexperienced player should go blindly into. It's sort of like the special edition releases of Star Wars. They're just pointless, a bit unpleasant, and they ruin the original product. In this case, I'd recommend the vanilla game any day over its remake. Halo Combat Evolved was originally released on PC a year after its console release, and while copies aren't too hard to find, they leave a lot to be desired. For example, while you can still buy copies for the game, you can't buy any more serial codes, as in the numbers you need to actually type in and install the game. There's an odd workaround, however, in that any key that worked once can be reused by anyone else with no problems whatsoever. You can just put in someone else's key and bam, you're playing Halo. This doesn't even affect the person either. It just allows you to install the game. This workaround feels a bit fishy, but again, it's the only way you can actually play the game anymore. However, you don't just want to install the base PC game. You want Custom Edition as well. It was a free update developed by Gearbox. Talk about dead memes. Which basically added a bunch of new little tweaks and features to the game, like mod support and custom content. It's what pretty much everyone plays on nowadays, and luckily it's really easy to find and download. On one hand, I appreciate how easy this game was to install. You can find these download links and patches everywhere. But on the other hand, it makes buying a legal physical copy entirely redundant. Plus, these are physical discs that aren't being manufactured anymore. I know how supply and demand works, so buying it physically won't be that feasible forever. Installing the game takes some time, but there are plenty of tutorials online. Just follow the steps, try not to break anything, and you should be all set. Going into this game, I just wanted to play the original campaign. To me, weird remasters just make this game look shitty, and they ruin the simplicity of the original. SPV3 is, to me, the exact same as Halo Anniversary. It's pointless, it's a little dumb, and it only makes you appreciate the original even more. No, I don't want a remaster. I just want the original game with some features that don't impact the visual tone of the game at all. Think of it kind of like a movie. If I wanted to watch, Psycho right now, how would I go about doing it? Well, I wouldn't go about buying a fully new remake shot in color. No, I'm gonna buy a Blu-ray of the original film. The exact same original film, just in a bit more sharper detail. That's what I want in my old games. I want a crisp HD resolution, a decent frame rate, and hey, throw in an FOV slider and you're good to go. The first mod I set out to download was Halo CE Refined. For those who don't know, the single player port we got for the PC is a sad downgrade from the original Xbox version, with just less graphical features. The Refined mod has been an ongoing project made through a collaboration of various modders with a sort of open source mentality, my particular favorite being the high-res widescreen HUD. Just look at that HUD. Look how sharp it is. To play, all you need is to download these map files and just drag them into your game folder. Again, I'll link some good tutorials in the description. So is this mod perfect? Well, no, of course not. It's pretty nice, I'll give it that. The amount of effort is pretty astonishing, to the point where you might not even notice that you aren't playing an official Microsoft re-release. Still, you'll encounter tons of graphical glitches, some that genuinely take you out of the immersive experience. So for now, know that if you want to play the original campaign, you might as well go for it, as it's not that bad. But if you're willing to sit through some texture glitching, then download Halo Refined. Either way, pick up the HD widescreen HUD. Seriously, this HUD is great. The second mod that I had to get was Halo Open Source, and I'd imagine that anyone who's attempted to play Halo on the PC have passed by it before. It's less of a mod and more of just a general purpose Halo CE utility program that, yeah, it does touch up on some graphical features like improved lighting, bloom, that kind of stuff. However, its most important feature, for me, is the FOV slider. Oh man, this is a game changer, literally. I'll be the first one to admit that, yeah, I cannot physically go back to my console games and try to play any of those FPS titles. At least, not without a bottle of Advil. I've often heard that getting a gaming PC is kind of like opening Pandora's box, or like taking a red pill. There's no going back, and this is absolutely true for me, with FOV probably being the worst offender. I have no idea why, but console games love to push the camera in way too close. The entire Halo trilogy is notorious for having horribly small fields of view. Halo 3 is probably the worst one. I'm sorry guys, I just cannot play like this without throwing up. Anyways, Open Source for Halo Combat Evolved allows you not only just to change your FOV with an easy to use slider, but even lets you change other stuff as well, like even weapon models. I imagine this was included mostly just to let players playing on higher FOVs, like me, fix any clipping issues with the weapon models. Or, say you want your weapon to be closer to the screen, but you want your FOV to stay high, you can just edit the models as well. Each weapon can be modified individually too, so you can legitimately tune each weapon to fit your preferred view. This feature is surprisingly enjoyable. And yeah, I have to admit, I spend a bit too much time just using this tool to turn the game into Doom. So that's Halo. Halo Combat Evolved remains a fantastic game to play, despite being an almost 18-year-old console game. Playing it on modern hardware with modern features definitely helped. And honestly, it's the way that this game needs to be played. My only issue, and it's an issue that's a pretty big barrier to entry, is that the game is hard to get, at least legally, which is weird because people would buy the vanilla game. I feel like the PC version has been neglected. You can get the Anniversary Edition on console and soon to be on PC, which yeah, it does allow you to swap between the two graphics modes. However, all the audio was redone for Anniversary as well, which means that even if you play with the old graphics, you're still forced to hear the new audio, which includes new sound effects and a new soundtrack. Just kill me already. I recommend the original PC version to anyone interested in actually playing the game, old and new fans alike. If you're willing to go through the setup, I'd say it's entirely worth it.
Older Halo fans wishing to relive a classic vanilla Halo experience, albeit with a few improvements to make it all the more easier, follow my setup and get it on PC. Or if you're a younger gamer who is somewhat unfamiliar with Halo, but you'd still like to give it a shot, stick with the original PC version. You need to play Halo at a crisp HD resolution with a nice smooth frame rate, with a keyboard and mouse and a nice high FOV. It just feels great. Halo is a game that I'd recommend to just about anyone. Casual gamers will find that the game is very easy to get into, while longtime hardcore gamers will be able to have fun on higher difficulties. Combat Evolved is far from a perfect game, but despite its flaws, it manages to remain timeless. The original game behind this huge unexpected franchise still holds up as a fantastic FPS with a neat story and a beautiful atmosphere to get immersed in. It's a game that stands as a huge reason why I got into gaming in the first place, and it will always be a game that I love. So, thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this long video. If you guys wish to see more content like it, then please subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, I'm Inspector Magnum, and you folks, you have a good one.